Resident Evil is turning 30 years old next year in 2026, and while there is still a good chance there may be no Resident Evil games releasing this year, we should expect some huge announcements in the coming months to celebrate the anniversary of Capcom's most successful franchise. I just recently did a video going over my announcement predictions for Persona's 30th anniversary happening next year, and thought, well, Resident Evil is also celebrating its 30th anniversary in 2026. So let's go over my predictions for when we can expect to get the announcements and speculated release dates for several of the most rumored and leaked Resident Evil projects in development. These predictions are entirely my own, but I do reference numerous leaks and insider information here to help corroborate my claims. However, please note that none of this is official and should be taken with a grain of salt. That said, Capcom will likely do this series justice with their upcoming milestone for Resident Evil, so more games, a movie, and more are likely in store for us RE fans next year, with announcements soon to follow in the coming months. Boulder punch that like button and let me know your own predictions in the comments below, and without further ado, let's get into it. To start things off, we do know that Zach Kreger, best known for the successful 2022 horror film Barbarian, is the director for next year's Resident Evil movie, which will be released on September 18th, 2026 by Sony. While not much else has been revealed about this upcoming live-action movie, Kreger recently spoke during a presentation at CinemaCon explaining that this upcoming RE movie will be, quote, unlike any of the previous films, and that it was, quote, built in the spirit of the games, end quote. Definitely sounds promising, especially when considering this director's great track record, and considering this will be a film to help punctuate the series' 30th anniversary. A movie that contains the spirit of the Resident Evil games sounds just like the thing us RE fans would want in an RE film. This Resident Evil movie is literally the only confirmed Resident Evil project to be releasing next year, but I wouldn't expect this to be the only thing we get for the anniversary. Far from it, because before we get into the heavy hitters, we already know that there are 2 other games releasing potentially even this year from Resident Evil. Not gonna spend much time on this one since we covered these titles a bit earlier this year, but remasters of both Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6 were rated on the ESRB earlier this year, and oddly, only for the Xbox Series X and S. We'll almost certainly get editions of these games for the PS5, PC, and maybe even other platforms, like perhaps the Switch 2 when the remasters launch, but as strange as it is to see these PS3 generation games listed on the ESRB, there's no doubt that these games are going to be released yet again. Even though we currently have remasters of these games that can be played via backward compatibility, maybe we'll see the console versions get 4K support, and interestingly enough, the ESRB listing does state that there appears to be in-game purchases, something that was absent from the existing remasters from the previous generation. Yeah, it's pretty strange to see these games get yet another remaster, but as for when we can expect to hear about these games, I'm betting we could potentially hear about these remasters around Summer Game Fest this coming June. Capcom has consistently shown their games in both the main Summer Game Fest showcase and during their Capcom showcase during the week of the event, so I'd expect this event would be the first time we could likely get an official word about these games. An ESRB rating indicates that the games are content complete, so yeah, we're likely to hear about these titles soon. Alright, now we go to the heavy hitters that are likely to be the headlining announcements for Resident Evil's 30th anniversary. First, we gotta talk about Resident Evil 9. This game has so many leaks spanning several years, with the first leaks occurring mere months after Resident Evil Village launched in 2021, so check out this video, linked in the description and at the end of this one, to get caught up on everything we know about the game from the leaks. But I would absolutely expect to get the official reveal of Resident Evil 9 here at this June's Summer Game Fest. I'm not sure we are going to get a release date here, but definitely a trailer along with a release window for the title, with my prediction that the game will launch in the second half of 2026. I personally think we are going to be getting 2 brand new Resident Evil games next year, with this one being released after a remake, as the remake, which we are going to cover shortly, would essentially draw up hype for RE9 later into the year. Perhaps the most well-known leaker in the Resident Evil community, Dustgolem, with a decent track record, has stated that Resident Evil 9 is the most ambitious RE game yet, alluding to the potential of this game featuring open-world elements. Recent leaks from Biodeclassified state that both Jill Valentine and Leona S. Kennedy would be playable characters, but Dusk mentioned that he heard nothing about Jill being a playable character here, leaving only Leon as a potential protagonist for this next mainline RE title. Regardless of how this shapes up, it's been about 4 years since we got the last mainline Resident Evil game in Resident Evil Village, so we should absolutely expect to hear about Resident Evil 9 this year, and likely at Summer Game Fest. Should we not get a release date here, Capcom is also known to make huge announcements at the Game Awards, so an official release date announcement there could be feasible. This brings us over to the next Resident Evil remake. Shortly after the release of 2023's Resident Evil 4 remake, Capcom confirmed that they would be remaking more games in the RE series. And with Capcom having released RE2 Remake, RE3 Remake, and RE4 Remake all within about 4 years, I believe this next remake will usher in a new series of RE remakes over the coming years, with this next remake being one of 3 games. Resident Evil 0 Remake, a remake of the 2002 Resident Evil remake from the GameCube, or Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake. None of these games have received over-the-shoulder remakes in the RE engine, so we'd be fools not to think that all these games would get their due remakes in time. As for the leaks, interestingly enough, all 3 of these potential remakes have been heavily leaked, with a leak of a Code Veronica playtest emerging in late 2023, remake information for Resident Evil 1 Remake surfacing in May 2024, and most recently, information on a Resident Evil 0 remake dominating the discourse. Again, Dustgolem has really been driving the narrative that a remake of Resident Evil 0 would be the next most likely remake to happen, with Capcom's K2 and M2 teams, both of whom contributed to the base RE4 remake and were responsible for the Separate Ways DLC, working on the remake of Resident Evil 0. This certainly makes sense, seeing as RE0 is the first entry in the Resident Evil series canonically, so I could totally see this remake being the one that is released first, but I could also see the next remake be another remake of Resident Evil 1. While we already have an incredible remake of the first game, let's be real here. Outside of the outspoken fanbase that doesn't want another Resident Evil 1 remake, an over-the-shoulder remake of the first game would be incredible, and considering this could launch on the series' 30th anniversary, would really make this milestone even sweeter. We could all be wrong here, and maybe Capcom surprises everyone with the much-requested remake of Code Veronica, but I personally doubt it, as while I do believe that that game will get released at some point, having prior knowledge of RE0 and especially RE1 is important before we get that Code Veronica remake. While not really worth diving into, a fan was able to meet the actress for Jill Valentine, Nicole Tompkins, at a recent convention, shown here in this post on Reddit, where the Redditor claims that the actress winked when asked if she would play Jill Valentine again for an RE1 remake. Read into this however much you want, but even if an RE1 remake doesn't happen soon, it's likely to happen at some point. At the end of the day, there are pretty extensive leaks regarding all 3 of these potential remakes, so I'd absolutely expect to hear about one of these either at Summer Game Fest or at the Game Awards. I'm leaning on Summer Game Fest personally, as I think this remake would likely launch before RE9 to serve as a throwback to the series' origins before jumping to the continuation of the mainline series releasing later that year. But yeah, that's just my prediction. I'll narrow it down to either this being Resident Evil 0 remake or a Resident Evil 1 remake. But sound off your predictions in the comments what you think the next Resident Evil remake will be. While both the next Resident Evil remake and Resident Evil 9 are likely the 2 games to punctuate the series' 30th anniversary next year, I'd expect some collaborations to happen as well, especially within the Monster Hunter series and maybe even Street Fighter, with Monster Hunter Wilds in a few weeks debuting their first collaboration with another Capcom franchise, so collaborations should definitely be expected here. And yeah, I think that about does it for my predictions regarding announcements ahead of Resident Evil's 30th anniversary next year, so sound off in the comments what your own predictions are and what you hope to see announced in the coming months as Capcom readies the series for its 30th birthday. Now, I'm fully aware that we may only just get one big game for its 30th, with the game, if we were to only get one, being Resident Evil 9, just due to the sheer volume of leaks it has already received and such, but I'm pretty confident that 2 games, one released at the start of the year and one near the end of the year, is what we are likely looking at for this upcoming anniversary. That's all I have for you in this one, my friends. Come join me over in this video as we go over everything we know about Resident Evil 9 from all the leaks over the years, and I look forward to seeing you real soon in the next video.